Hello everyone, my name is Katie Wyatt and I'm excited to share some of my research with you all. The topic of my research is workplace conflicts, specifically cultural clashes, and even more specifically clashes between the cultures of Italy, Germany, and the US. I work with many Italians and Germans who are employees being led by mainly American managers. This of course leads to some conflicts that I believe are simple miscommunications because of varying cultural expectations of the workplace. Not only is there the obvious language barrier, although all of the Germans and Italians do speak English, but our managers only speak English. So, of course, there can be miscommunications and things lost in translation that way. But also, there are a lot of cultural differences when it comes to working in these countries. For instance, the idea of vacation time and sick time and health insurance through your workplace are all different among these different countries, and it can lead to misunderstandings and unknowing of things, which causes conflict as well. So I wanted to dive in and study more about that. Okay, moving on, the key experts and approaches that I used for this research paper. My main inspiration was actually from Hofstede's Cultural Dimensions. He made these various indexes for many different countries using the dimensions of power, distance, individualism, masculinity, uncertainty, avoidance, long-term orientation, and indulgence. They all have been studied in different countries, and each country has been given a score of each of them. And using those scores, we can see the general feelings of that country and the values that they hold. Not saying that it applies 100% to every single person within a society, just that they're kind of the general values of those countries, which is super helpful in gaining a base understanding of a country and the people from that country. For instance, power distance, one of the big ones, has to do with the extent to which people in a society accept that there is a hierarchy among, for instance, a manager and employee relationship, and how strict that hierarchy is and how acceptable that is to the people. So in Germany, for instance, they have a low power distance score. So that means that they like a collaborative nature better. They are not as comfortable with a strict hierarchy of like a dictator, for instance. They don't like that as much. They want more collaborative involvement in decision-making processes. Whereas in Italy, they have a higher score for power distance, not very high, but still higher than Germany. So they are more accepting of that and more okay with someone giving direction and following that direction, for instance. And I've noticed this sometimes in my workplace, when the German employees have ideas that maybe for something that could be more efficient in the workplace, and they bring those ideas up to my American managers, they're not always taken maybe as seriously as the Germans would like. And so that leads to some frustration on the part of the German employees because they feel their voice is not being heard and they're not as used to that feeling in the workplace. They're more accustomed to having a voice. Another big dimension of this index is individualism, and that means how much a society values individual work versus collective work. For instance, in the US, we have one of the highest scores of individualism, which means we really value our self-work. We value working for ourselves and bettering ourselves, whereas in collectivist societies like Germany and Italy, they value collaborative work for the greater good for the whole of the country, versus in the US, we want to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. The next approach that I used for this topic was the idea of cultural intelligence, CQ for cultural quotient. It's basically how well you can work effectively and communicate effectively across cultures. It's becoming more and more important in our global society to be able to relate and effectively communicate with people from cultures other than our own. The next idea that I found in my research was that of the effects of differing leadership values in the workplace and how it can affect the people they're working with, especially if they're from other cultures where they have different values of the workplace environment. So a big one that I found was the idea of cyber loafing, which is when you use company resources, specifically in cyber loafing's case, using company computers or internet for personal use. And you can also be quote-unquote loafing in other ways, basically just using companies' resources for personal use. And in different cultures, they have different ideas on that. Some cultures are very okay with that in more relaxed ways, but other cultures are the opposite, and they believe that you should not be doing anything for personal use while you are at work. And of course, that can cause conflict when you have these different expectations of the workplace. Especially when you have individualistic versus collectivist societies, as the countries that I'm studying are. When it comes to the US, we are very individualistic, versus Germany and Italy, which are more collectivist. And I found that a big idea in individualistic societies is that of self-promotion or embellished self-perceptions are often rewarded and reinforced, and that's what gets you promoted. Whereas in a collectivist society, they consider that bragging, and it's a negative thing. So, for instance, in the workplace, when you have a manager who has those characteristics in the US, that is looked favorably upon as considered confidence, and you want that person to be promoted. Whereas in a society like Germany, for instance, that is not considered beneficial to the workplace. They want someone who is more collaborative, more hands-on, willing to work alongside the employees. And in the US, they want a delegator. They want someone to be able to delegate different tasks to different people. So when that comes together, the American managers believe they are leading in the correct way that will bring them and their team success, but the German employees see it as the managers unwilling to work alongside the employees. Culture, identity, and power certainly make a difference in how a person perceives communication, especially in the workplace. Like I talked about earlier, with the differences in the cultural dimensions, such as power distance, that can lead to people have differing expectations when it comes to how work is conducted. And with differing scores in those indexes, they can cause conflict, and perceptions of how people are working are skewed and different between different cultures, especially in terms of power and power distance. With this differing scores, it can be seen as in America, for instance, the American managers have too much power, whereas for Germans, they want more collaborative input, and that affects their dynamic between them and causes culture clashes as well. Some solutions that I have found through my research to deal with these cultural conflicts in the workplace. First, to define workplace experience assumptions. When you understand other people's expectations of the workplace. It's much easier to deal with conflicts. Offering insight into different cultures and their values, just learning about someone's culture and understanding the values and why they do the things they do can stop and de-escalate conflicts. Using specific examples of cultural differences in our workplace to help define the differing values is important, and more so just communication. Communication is, you can never have too much communication. So really that is one of the most important things. For the paradigm of engagement, or how I would bring up these solutions in the workplace, I would bring the leadership team together and bring up examples of past conflicts where I believe it was just a simple cultural misunderstanding, and show the reasons that culture has those values and why the employee did the action that they did, and how it was coming from a place of cultural assumptions and not a negative, like insubordinate type of behavior. And then I would give examples of other cultures and their values and their actions for those values and how that affects their behavior as well, and explain to the leadership team in hopes of them understanding. So that concludes my presentation. I want to thank you guys for making it this far, making it all the way through. I would love to hear any feedback you have and help when I am finishing up this research and this paper. I know I still have other things to consider and dive deeper into maybe to fully get a better understanding of everything. And definitely I can work on my solutions to the problem and how I bring that up in the workplace. But I would love to hear what you think. Thank you so much.